Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash. Today I'm going to be talking about a game between Fabiano Caruana and Maxime Vachier Lagrave that happened in round two of the Sinquefield Cup tournament today. This game's pretty interesting in my opinion. We have Fabiano Caruana playing white and Lagrave playing black. Without much explanation, much without much other explanation, I guess we can just start. The game started with e4, and we get a Caro-Kann defense with an early advanced variation where white takes a lot of space in the center. Another alternative was, of course, knight c3 instead of e5. And, well, this position is pretty well known among common, grandmaster practice with an early bishop e2, possibly c3, trying to support and bolster hit to the center. And white's ideas revolve around bishop e3, trying to control the c5 square, and possibly in the future castling knight e1, and perhaps trying to push f4 and get a slow kingside attack. White has been doing pretty well lately in games in this kind of position. So, one of White's plans is to prevent c5, and in this position, Black decided to play c5. And it's always a wonder whether this is a good move or a bad move. You've already wasted one move on c6, and compared to a French advanced variation, you already have your bishop out, but essentially you've kind of wasted a tempo by moving this bishop already. So you're kind of two tempos down essentially with the bishop outside the pawn chain and not being a defender compared to a normal advanced variation. Generally, this variation is considered very risky for black because white can develop very fast with like Caruana did in the game with bishop e3, and black's general plan behind this setup is to move the queen out early in this kind of position. And there's not really such a great alternative as a move like knight c6 is already losing a pawn to d takes c5, and it's not so clear how to really reclaim the pawn. So, going back, instead of knight c6, black just went pretty much depending on this pawn grab, and white doesn't really want to defend the b pawn with a move such as queen c1 or b3. That looks really really slow. The aggressive moves against a move like queen b6 are often the best ones to try and just completely refute black's setup. And after knight c3, as Caruana played, he's relying on the fact that queen takes b2 is met by knight b5 when knight c7 is a threat, and after knight a6, I think pawn takes c5 is a pretty good move as well. I mean, you can't really recapture it given that I'll just take and play knight c7. So you have to take this pawn and try to get the queens off the board, but takes, and giving this check, bishop here, and check. And this kind of position is excellent for white as he'll get rook c1, king d2, and have a very, very nice lead in development with the strong protected pawns here. I think white's doing pretty good here. And that's not what black wants usually. That looks pretty risky, really. So instead of grabbing the pawn so early, he decided to complete his development with knight c6. And in this position, white would like to take on c5, winning a pawn, with this idea that bishop takes e5 is met by knight a4, but unfortunately queen a5 check is in this position, and white has to play c3, but then black can take on e3, and that's a good position for white. So one of white's ideas is to take here, and he gets his king out of the center and continues to let the b pawn, just be on, let's say, hanging. And in this position, black just scooped up the pawn, and in this position, white can play knight b5 or knight a4, kind of attacking the queen and keeping, the options open on possibly getting an attack over here or kind of putting pressure on the dark squares. But I think Caruana plays a pretty good and interesting move with the queen e1 move he played. And his idea is that, once you take on c2 with your queen, my queen is not going to be exposed here, and I'm not going to be subjected to a queen trade here. And with your lack of development over here and not such a great king side, and kind of an open space over here around this king, keeping the queens on the board should lead to a pretty decent position. Now in the game, I believe that black played c takes d4, pawn takes pawn here, and I guess he doesn't really have another great move. I mean, a move like c4 is just met by rook b1, and black has to play queen a3, which is not the greatest looking move in the world, obviously, since since queen takes c2 is met by the strong move bishop d1 actually, and this queen has to actually probably sacrifice itself on the b1 square, and after takes here. Keep in mind, after queen d3, rook takes b7, and I think after queen d3 actually, I think bishop e2 is trapping the queen if I'm missing something here. Let me just make sure that this is right. Or is it? I think it's bishop a4. Bishop a4 followed by rook d1. There's all these like little queen traps that you can try with the bishop and the rook here, kind of coordinating, covering all the squares here. I think that's one of the main threats in this kind of position. Obviously, black cannot allow that, and after the queen takes the rook, knight takes queen, bishop takes knight, bishop a4 gaining a tempo in the queen, bishop here, and bishop d3 trying to attack this rook, but white has queen a5 with queen c7, getting strong pressure here on the squares here, and here's a little sample line that I thought of that was pretty decent. Bishop takes f1, queen c7, and this position is very, very close to collapsing on c6. And black can defend this, but after the strong move bishop g5, attacking the defender here, and if this knight goes, then this knight goes, and the whole position collapses, and I think black is just lost here. So obviously this kind of continuation, grabbing too much material without development isn't a great idea. I don't know, maybe queen a3 in that kind of position is better, but I think white's doing excellently there. One of it is he just took the pawn in c4, and the idea is that knight takes b4 is probably met by bishop b4, and I mean I don't know. I mean it's let's say after bishop b4, right? Or knight takes d4, bishop b4, knight takes f5. One idea is that I'm getting knight d6 in. So say like how should I say this? A move like e takes f5, which looks perfectly natural, is probably just met by bishop d2 covering the c3 knight, and both sides can continue their development, but white should be doing pretty well, even though I think he's down a pawn, right? Even though he's down a pawn in this position, he has open lines, and black has some weak pawns here, and I think white should be doing okay in this position. But I mean, it's not better. It's what Fabiano played is better than that, though. I think. I mean, there are also lines where instead of taking here, black can just take here instead, and you might get an endgame in like this kind of position where I mean, white's likely doing okay too. But I mean, clearly, I like the game continuation more with bishop takes d4, protecting the c3 knight, and not having to worry about bishop b4 so often. So after bishop d4, black just took the knight here. And after knight takes d4, he played bishop b4, kind of the same idea, but the problem is this runs into knight db5, and we kind of see this threat kind of looming here. A move such as rook b1 is, I think, is just met by bishop takes c3, and I think after you get this kind of queen exchange, this kind of position is probably pretty decent compensation with an early you're trying to break in the center and try to activate your pieces here with probably getting on the d file and putting pressure on this king, but it's not entirely clear if a continuation like rook d1, bishop f3. I'm just trying to illustrate the plan here. It's not so clear if white has as much say in that position than what Fabiano played. I think white's doing well there, but what he played in the game is quite good actually. After bishop b4, knight db5, keeping the queens on the board especially. That's an important concept to remember here. After knight db5, I mean, black had to defend against c7, and he didn't really want to commit the king or commit the rook. He wants to play knight e7, knight h6, and get the heck out of there. So bishop a5 makes a lot of sense. Perhaps he should have, taken the knight and taken this risk, but given that the queen is hanging, white has to address this threat. So black has to address that threat. So on c7, so he decides to take on c3. White has to take back with the knight, and he doesn't want a queen trade. Obviously, queen takes would largely help black a lot. So black would continue his development here, but I mean, I suspect the move such as bishop b5 is already giving white a pretty good game. You can insert rook b1 first, but After this position, I feel like queen e3, and you can already see queen c5, f4. This kind of these kind of moves with f5 and queen c5 and rook c1. This position looks really bad for black, and this king's just stuck in the center. Won't be able to breathe for the rest of the game. So after bishop a5, that Lagrave played, white continued with his rook b1 move, and black didn't really find anything better than just to take the pawn. And after rook c1, getting another attempt on the queen b4, queen b2, I think Fabiano plays a really, really interesting move here with g4. And at first, the computer doesn't really like this, but I actually like this move. Unlike in Topolov's game the other day, g4 didn't really have a attacking plan behind it, but you can just see f4, f5 coming for white, and after the game continuation, this is really tough to defend. Rook f2 is especially strong. You're threatening bishop d3 and breaking the whole thing open. And if the whole thing breaks open, I mean, black's just dead here. There's not really a chance. Of course, white can always play knight d6 in this kind of position, but you will probably want to time this better when you have more of your pieces in better spots, with perhaps f5 already in. Certainly it was playable, but rook f2 has a really, really strong idea. And one idea you can really, really look at is that bishop b6 is probably just met by knight a4, forking the bishop and the queen. And after bishop takes f2, king takes f2, making sure that not queen takes f2 because the rook is hanging. Queen takes here, and you have knight c7 with a crushing attack at that end of the line. That's not good for black due to that really, really concrete tactic there. It's hard to recommend anything for black. I mean, he played queen b4, which is, I mean, it's probably a good move. It's probably the relatively best move. But I mean, the position after queen b1, a strong move, getting out of this pin, and kind of keeping all the threats together with knight takes here, knight here, and knight d6. Kind of bringing all the pieces together, possibly bishop b5 after knight d6, and you can always move your rook over if you need it. Always having this f5 in. That's pretty good for white. I mean, you can also play knight d6, and I mean, after king f8, I guess f5 pushing through, and white has pretty substantial compensation for the exchange in that kind of position. Black played queen b4 here, and instead of knight d6, he played a queen d1, as I mentioned, and in this position, black decided to drop the bishop back. And I'm sorry, guys. I didn't. Let's see if I can. Yeah, instead of queen b4, I got my move orders mixed up, guys. After bishop b4, rook f2, black didn't end up playing queen b. He ended up playing the move knight h6, trying to castle next move. I apologize for that mix up there. And after knight h6, we kind of saw this idea of rook f2 covering this discovery attack in the queen and kind of threatening to take this piece right here. And I mean, after queen b4, that's kind of forced moving the queen back here, trying to get a little bit more support for the defense. White gained another tempo on this queen with rook b1, and I mean, queen c5, and I mean, queen e7 is also plausible, but I mean, after queen c5, it's pretty much all the same with the strong move, knight takes here, takes, and I guess what Fabiano missed in this what Lagrave missed in this kind of calculations is just that bishop takes e1 is met by knight takes c5, bishop takes f2, king takes f2, and you talk about two superb knights in this kind of position, coordinating with the bishop and rook here, and black having no development whatsoever. A move like knight takes here is met by king f3, and you can't really take that big one because of king g3, and if you back up, well, I mean, check, and taking there is just awful for black. So I mean, the entire position just didn't really work out for black after he pawn grabbed, and that's a really risky decision that demands precise calculation. Really. Okay, so we saw knight takes e4, and Instead of bishop takes e1, I think Lagrave played a d takes e4, just recapturing. And after this, white just took the bishop, obviously, and in this position, black just thought, okay, let's get my king out of the center. But the problem is, after bishop e2, kind of consolidating the position, really defending the g4 pawn against knight g4. E3, rook ff1 here, queen e1 retreating, trying to get out of this a6 move. Um, the idea that black had to play rook c8 first and not a6 was that after a6 in this specific position, there's queen c3 attacking the queen and relying on the knight supporting the queen there. So rook fc8, and well, Lagrave didn't play on for that much longer, and well, and when you're up a piece, there's not much technique to show, and White's just aiming to trade off some pieces, and he took the last pawn here, and well, there's not much to play for when White controls all the squares, and queen takes c5 is not even playable because of queen takes e5, knight takes e5, and rook b7, I suspect, and Black had enough and threw in the towel. So going back, I mean, Lagrave took this really, really risky decision. I really like Caruana's play here with this early queen e1 move. And by the way, maybe black's best kind of move in this position is queen b4, but it's an extremely tough defense knowing that you're going to have f5 and all these kind of moves with bishop d3, trying to open and then rip apart the center with knight d6 also, and it's a very, very tough position to play. I really don't really like this kind of line with an early queen b6 all too much risk, delaying your development. That's one thing I don't like, guys. One piece of advice I would give you to guys, I would really avoid those pawn grabbing openings where you move your queen around a lot. It's just not advisable to do that kind of thing, and this especially where the queen side got ripped apart. Well, overall, I think Fabiano played a really, really well, played a really good attacking game. I know my battery's running low, guys. So, well, after this really, really nice queen e1 move, I think Fabiano really earned his point. Well, anyways, guys, I guess that's pretty much for this video. Leave a comment if you didn't like something. Leave a comment if you did like something. Anyways, I'll be continuing these videos probably with the Carlsen game next. This is Infinite Flash signing out.